Hey guys, if you're watching this, that means I'm at home with a baby, not sleeping. Fun stuff. I'm sure it's going great though, and I am sure I miss you guys so much. So, I told you guys this next unit was about plants. So this is how we're going to do notes this time. Fun stuff. It's going to be so sad because I don't get to hear your awesome, sarcastic, or even non-sarcastic comments the whole time. So it is more boring this way, but here we are. Obviously this isn't PowerPoint, but this is the whole unit. You get an awesome blank page at the end, draw a pretty picture. Have fun with that. Some of the formatting is weird, but every year I go through this and I try to clean it up, and I just need to change it over to the PowerPoint version with the new textbook, but that takes us so much time. So here we are. It's fine. I hope you guys have passed elementary school and you know the basic parts of a flower: roots, leaves, stems, and flower. Well, basic parts of any plant. This time it's filled out most of the way because I was having technical difficulties and had to start it over because it kept pausing on me. But most of the time when I do this, I'll be filling that in. So, you know that roots absorb water. Roots actually have root hairs to increase the surface area for water absorption. That seems to be something that they're obsessed with, is surface area. They always bring it up. How do plants use surface area to increase absorption of something? How do animals? So that's one way plants do, is the root hairs. Stems give support and transport materials. Leaves have the chloroplast for photosynthesis. They also have the stomata, so they're used for gas exchange, the CO2 and oxygen. Now, we'll talk so much about stomata, and you could put water next to this as well. But these are the two main things, and we'll talk about the water here in a second. In terms of the anatomy of the leaf, you will not be tested over this. It's more just so that you're familiar with the terms. So, cuticle, go ahead and write that. It's on the surface of the leaf, sometimes called cutin. Technically, cutin is like on the surface of the cuticle, but they usually use those words synonymously, cuticle and cutin. Here's the epidermis layer, those cells. Meso means middle, so here's your middle section of the leaf. And the very packed cells are called palisade, mesophyll. The area that has a lot of air pockets is called the spongy mesophyll. Down here we have your stomata and vacuole. And so those, you're probably familiar with those too, maybe not so much the others, but those are parts of the leaf. So, under leaves, you have the palisade mesophyll, spongy, and then you guys know the opening in the leaves are called stomata. And you'll learn all about this, but they actually have these cells surrounding them, so the stomata is a hole, and then there are these two, this does not work very well, these two cells around them that will open and then close to open and shut the stomata. But again, you'll learn all about that. Transpiration is the evaporation of water from plants, and that can also happen through the stomata. So that's what I was citing a second ago, of how the stomata are for gas exchange of these two. But you do also have evaporating water leaving the plant through those holes as well. And then there's that waxy covering on the surface of a leaf called cutin. And then leaves also have hairs on them, tiny little hairs called trichomes. They love to ask you about the trichomes, and they have several purposes. One thing they do is they reflect light, and so because they reflect light, they're gonna cut down on transpiration. I don't know if this is going to confuse you later, putting this underneath here, and you might ask yourself why you put this. But these are two benefits of transpiration. It cools plants, it moves water up the plant, and we'll talk all about this later. But in general, transpiration is really good and necessary. But too much loss of water is obviously a bad thing. So trichomes can reflect light to cut down on that transpiration. It also decreases predation, so anything that is trying to eat the leaf, if it tastes those little trichomes, it usually doesn't like it. So it does decrease the predation. And then if we're talking about evolution, it's interesting because they've done studies where they show how the trichome density on plants actually increases after there's been herbivore damage to that plant. So it doesn't happen to the leaf right away, but in the future generations of that plant, those leaves have more trichomes. So it's really interesting. Okay, so here are some adaptations for dry climates. Thicker cuticle. So that can mean, I don't know how distracted you guys get with the information below hand, but thicker cuticle can mean that it's actually preventing water loss. But I've read a lot about this one, and for some reason they use that when we're just talking about trapping the water as well. Sorry, I was distracted. Someone was knocking on my door. I can't answer right now. So anyway, thicker cuticle could be there, and it's more waxy, so it reflects the sun more. But it also could trap water more. And that's weird to me because if evaporation is happening through the stomata, it's weird to me that that would make that much of a difference in trapping water, but that's always on the list. Less stomata in plants that are in the desert, so less stomata means less transpiration leaving. Some plants with fewer no stomata on the top and more on the bottom. So I don't remember if we talked about this, but if this is your leaf, your two layers, upper, lower layer, gas rises. So if you just have holes on the bottom, any of the water that's trying to evaporate, it's going to have a harder time if there's only holes on the bottom, because gas rises. So that kind of makes sense that there would be fewer no stomata on the top in dry climates. Also sunken stomata, so water gets trapped in here. There's more trichomes on plants in dry climates, and that's going to reflect the light. There's closed stomata during the day, so that's good. So when it's really hot, the sun is out, you're going to close the stomata, store your CO2 for the time of the day when it's cooler and the sun is not out. Then leaves for less surface area, and that's less surface area to lose water from. And then shallow roots. I don't know why that is pointing from there. It should be pointing from here. So if you just have a little bit of rainfall, there's no point in having roots that are really deep. You want those roots to be long and very shallow, so that if the water just goes this deep, all of those roots can absorb that water. Sometimes they will ask you about plants and water. So instead of using stomata, they will actually use surface cells to do gas exchange. So plants and water still do regular gas exchange. They just do it right through their surface cells, and they are using the gases that are dissolved in the water. And so you can see on an aquatic plant, there are no stomata. It doesn't need it because that gas exchange is going through those surface cells just right through. A plant that sits on top of water is only going to have them on the upper layer. And then your usual flower actually might not have any on the top and just on the bottom for reasons we explained earlier. Flowers are obviously the reproductive organ of the plant, and they produce egg and sperm. So if you are allergic to sperm in the springtime, I apologize for that. That's really kind of weird, but everybody tends to get allergies. One example of how the environment can influence flowers is by pH of the soil. So based on the pH of soil, you can change the color of the flower. Hydrangeas are an example of this. So I think it's the opposite. So bases usually turn indicators blue, but in the case of flowers, these flowers, basic soil actually turns the flowers pink. I don't know any other flower that happens with other than hydrangeas. When we talk about photosynthesis, they're photoautotrophs. So they automatically make their own food, and they're going to do that using light. Yes, there are things called chemoautotrophs. So that's not always just assumed to be the same thing. Photo means they use light. And then they're going to make organic molecules. We've already learned this, like carbs, amino acids, lipids, even nucleic acids. And remember, this is usually a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. So if you remember the basic equation, we kept talking, like in our last unit, we focused a lot on where the oxygen released for organisms came from, and you could see in the chloroplast that it came from splitting water. But there is other oxygen in this equation, and that's going to come from the CO2. So when it talks about the carbon in these molecules, that's going to come from CO2 as well. So the oxygen and the carbon right here come from CO2. Nitrogen is actually going to come from soil, as well as phosphorus. Only one place the hydrogen can come from. So none of that should be too new for you guys. So I think that covers the basics. That shouldn't be too hard. And then we'll go to the next section in a couple days.